On a dark day, two friends Asahi and Izumi found their friend Keed lying on the ground as they asked him what happened here. However, Keed seemed to be extremely traumatized by the tragedy he suffered just now, so much that he couldn't respond to anything. Now, everyone has conflicts, anxieties, and old emotional scars that they don't want anyone else to know. And just like that, our protagonist Keed was the same after this incident, and a year had passed as he tried to deal with his trauma. Apparently, he had transferred to a boys-only high school due to his trauma, and his previous teachers thought that must have been a relief for him. Whereas, Keed himself believed that it was a normal thing that the scars heal after a few years like nothing had happened. So now in the present, he was casually buying a drink at a convenience store, and after paying for it he got out and reassured himself everything was fine. And he would have a normal day today as well. Later on at the school, he went to the classroom being all cheerful as he wanted to share something with his friends Izumi and Asahi. And for the first time in his life he received a message from a girl he didn't know. Keed even thought this might just be a signal that life was about to arrive. Then his friends mentioned it could very well be a man, or a scammer, hearing which surprised Keed and he asked how they could know it for real. Asahi mentioned even if it was a girl, it could be a bad person or a honey trap or something weird. But Keed had a hard time believing it, so he showed the profile picture of that girl to show them how cute she was. Izumi stated that the photo might not be them, as it was normal that they could take random images from the internet. Asahi asked Keed for his phone to take a look at the texts, after which he confirmed it was filled with all the flags from a scam. Keed was a little upset, then Asahi reassured him that they have known each other since middle school, so he wanted good for Keed. That was why he told him that this kind of disbelief and naivety was also a kind of virtue. Keed told him not to call that kind of thing a virtue so casually, and that aside he was bummed because all the excitement he had for this chat was gone after knowing the truth. He muttered his wish to have a girlfriend or something like that and be able to fall in love like a normal person. Asahi and Izumi listened to him, then they started telling Keed that the internet sounded like a scary place, so he should cancel mobile data subscription and even home internet. Keed asked if the internet killed any of their relatives or something, and now that he thought about it, he asked them how they know so much about that, including that fake profile picture. Both of them went numb with just a few words that they just heard some rumors, but in reality it was something even they had gone through, getting a message and finding out it was an old man on the other side for various frauds. He'd asked if meeting people online was so dangerous, how could he meet girls? To which Asahi replied there were a lot of websites and he only needed to find someone who seemed decent. Suddenly, Keed felt a pullback and he noticed his bag's chain got stuck with a girl's bag's pendant. She apologized for it nervously, and Keed told her it was fine. He just pulled out both the chains to separate them, but his bag's chain broke, and the girl said sorry as she offered to pay for it since it was her fault. Keed told her not to worry since it was just an ornament, after which he plainly said bye and walked ahead to his friends. Asahi told him that was very clever, although that could have been a chance to meet a new girl. But to his surprise, Keed went silent and suddenly he sighed, saying that was really nerve-wracking. Asahi and Izumi were relieved to see he was okay, and teased Keed how he couldn't handle awkward situations. Keed seemed shy about it, while Asahi and Izumi were really glad this turned out to be fine. Next day after school, Keed came to tell his friends that during class he got another text, and they called it a straight-up scam and they didn't even have to take a look at it. Then the boys heading out the school saw a pretty girl standing outside the entrance gate, and Keed recognized she was the same girl from yesterday. She was flustered to meet Keed and expressed how thankful she was to find him because she had been looking for him. She had guessed Keed might be from this school, but she didn't expect getting this much attention. Keed told her it was obvious after all this was a boys-only high school. Then Izumi and Asahi found it better to leave Keed with that girl, so they went away while the girl apologized to Keed for before, and Keed told her there was no need for apologizing. Keed wondered where his friends went, then the girl mentioned there was something else she wanted to talk about. She requested if she could borrow him for a moment since they were drawing too much attention here. Keed agreed and they went to the corner of the wall to talk, and Keed took a good look at her and saw how pretty she was. Then the girl stated she wanted to be honest, while Keed wished inside he could go out with a girl like her, and to his surprise, she suddenly confessed her love for him as she fell in love with Keed at first sight. Keed was caught off guard by the sudden unexpected proposal, as she mentioned that the previous day after she saw Keed, she couldn't help but think he was the right one. Keed got startled and he started not knowing her at all, to which the girl replied she knew that, which was why she wasn't asking for an answer right now, and she would like to know each other, and if after that he was still not interested in her, she would give up. Keed's face was all flustered to hear that, then she expressed her wish to start as friends. She offered Keed her number and told him if he didn't want to, he could just throw her number away. Keed was feeling shy and he accepted her number while thinking it was finally his time to start his youth with this surprise. He was glad now that he could get a girlfriend like he always wanted, and he could finally be a normal person. Keed thanked her for this, and at the same time his friends were looking from behind the wall sneakily, and they could guess that Keed seemed to have gotten a confession. Asahi was glad they silently slipped away before to give them some space, and Izumi stated it was because they were always watching for their friend Keed's romantic opportunities. Now the girl introduced herself as Arasaka Tsubasa, a sophomore, and Keed also introduced himself back as Seto Keed, and he guessed they could call each other by their first names. She was fine with that and stated it was time for her to go home or she would miss the bus. She said sorry for taking his time, and hoped Keed could contact her. Suddenly, a running kid on the street stumbled into Tsubasa and she ended up getting pushed towards Keed. Tsubasa couldn't help from falling upon Keed, but that scene brought back the memories of Keed's trauma, and all of a sudden he couldn't move. Tsubasa ended up falling on Keed and he just took the fall. Tsubasa said sorry to Keed for that, while Keed seemed to stop muttering while being zoned out in fear. She didn't expect Keed to react like this, whereas his friends who thought Keed had a lucky incident suddenly realized Keed wasn't moving at all. They quickly ran to check up on him, and while Tsubasa was calling out Keed's name, his friends came and told her they were his friends. She explained the situation that someone pushed her and she fell over him. She was worried if Keed was alright, then Asahi asked her if she got hurt. Tsubasa replied she was fine, and they checked Keed wasn't hurt either, so she didn't have to worry and left to take her bus. Tsubasa didn't want to leave like this, then Asahi told her Keed might not want to be seen after that pathetic fall. Tsubasa thought that was the case and said sorry to have not noticed that, so she decided to go home. Meanwhile, Asahi didn't want or expect Keed to fall under a panic attack now of all times because of his trauma. They were worried for him, so they helped Keed stand up and started taking him home while reassuring Keed he didn't have to be afraid. But inside Keed's brain the only thing that was flashing was the gym, and the person who used to be his teacher, and lastly the traumatic events she caused for Keed even if he begged her to stop. After that incident, Keed's friends were the ones to find him and all they could see around Keed was his removed pants, messed up shoes and an even more messed up Keed, lying on the ground with hand on his mouth and shivering in fear while repeating the word stop. They helped Keed to sit, but when asked what happened, Keed trembled as he spoke, saying that he was assaulted by a woman. Now in the present, Keed's friends took him to a park and sat him down to calm Keed. They asked him if he was feeling okay now, and Keed said sorry for bothering them again. They told him he wasn't bothering them and he didn't have to worry about it. Keed began to state that with store clerks, or when he was in contact with a woman, he didn't usually feel like there were any problems, which gave him the idea that everything was alright. He always told himself that he was a normal boy like everyone else, but after all he realized now that he couldn't just go back to being normal no matter what. Asahi and Izumi were concerned as they told Keed they don't think that he was different to anyone else. Next day in the class, Asahi mentioned that a panic attack hadn't happened to Keed since middle school, and it had been 3 years since they transferred to a boys-only high school. He stated it was normal that Keed wanted a girlfriend now, so he always thought everything would be fine for him. Also, when they talk about girls with Keed, he always seemed to be happy saying things like he got a message. But after this he wondered if Keed was forcing himself, or if they did something wrong. Izumi thinks they didn't do anything wrong until now, and until yesterday Keed himself thought everything was fine. Izumi stated it was then who couldn't help but try to protect Keed for what happened with that teacher. Meanwhile, Keed was at the school's entrance thinking that he should act cheerful like always to be a normal boy. So, he entered the classroom being all cheerful while greeting his friends in the morning and saying he didn't get any scam messages today. Asahi and Izumi figure he looks cheerful and ask him if he called the girl he met yesterday. Keed replied he didn't call but added her number for now. Asahi and Izumi told him that was cruel because he told her they could start being friends, and now she might be thinking that he rejected her. Keed was feeling guilty as he was aware of this as well, but he was concerned after he showed her something weird the previous day. He was sure that she didn't want anything with him after that, and in the end he couldn't even say bye to her. Asahi and Izumi didn't think Keed was right, and instead the worst was that Keed didn't send her a message if he was worried about that. Asahi told him not to overthink, and he could just send a simple thank you for yesterday's text to her, and it would be enough. He'd thought they were right, and he would like to know Tsubasa better so that they could really be friends and he could get a normal romance to prove to himself that he could also be normal. After taking 3 hours to think of a reply, Keed came up with a super full and business-like message to send to the member of the opposite gender for the first time in his life. He also got a reply from Tsubasa saying his message was so stiff, but her reply was friendly and she was glad he wasn't hurt anywhere because she was worried. Some days passed, and Keed was texting her often these days. Then Asahi came and asked if he was still in contact with that girl. Keed stated it had been a week since they came in contact. However, to Izumi, it didn't seem like Keed was as excited as he expected him to be. Keed replied he was about 5 times happier till yesterday, until she asked him something as he showed a message to Izumi that Tsubasa asked Keed if they could meet up after school. Asahi and Izumi were impressed by how assertive she was, to be already asking Keed on a date, but Keed was worried, thinking if he would be fine meeting her. He was still worried after what happened that day, and Asahi and Izumi could remember it as well. They became silent for a moment, then Asahi asked Keed if he wanted them to accompany him. Keed refused, saying he met a girl with their guardian, but they were worried if something similar happened. So, that was why they ended up visiting their school nurse, Teacher Miyamoto, because he gives really good advice to students who need help. Izumi confirmed with Miyamoto if he knew about Keed's past, to which Miyamoto replied he was told about it during an interview with Seto Keed's family. Then Asahi explained the situation that recently Keed bumped into a girl, and he had a relapse. Miyamoto could guess that must have been terrible. Then Keed said he was fine now thanks to his friends calming him down, but it was just that this was his first relapse after he entered high school, so he was a little surprised. And aside from that, a lot of stuff happened and he got asked out on a date. Miyamoto congratulated him while thinking just how a mysterious situation turned into a date. Now, Keed asked the main topic that he was wondering what he should do if that panic attack happens again. And he also went to do his best without running away from this situation. Miyamoto could see Keed was really trying his best. Then Keed asked the teacher what he thought of this and if it was a good idea to meet her again. Asahi and Izumi were not against it, although they were still kind of worried about it. So they came to Miyamoto to see if there were any measures they could take. Miyamoto asked Keed if he harbored any kind of fear when coming into contact with other people. And Keed didn't feel like that since he was fine even when he was playing soccer with others. When Miyamoto asked him if he was afraid of girls, Keed quickly replied he actually wanted a girlfriend, hearing that Miyamoto couldn't see any issues with everyday life in an all-boys school. That means the panic attack was probably triggered by some conditions that stimulate his trauma. After taking a look at Keed, Miyamoto figured if he could trust someone and explain his circumstances to them, as long as there was understanding between them, Seto Keed would feel secure. However, the chances of him getting hurt was also high, so he advised Keed to avoid any kind of abrupt contact as they could not turn a blind eye when a panic attack happened recently. Miyamoto didn't necessarily think it was necessary to lie and say Keed was a clean freak, so he asked how about Keed telling that girl that he was not okay with close contact. He didn't fail to mention there were girls who were quite clingy, which Miyamoto learned from his work experience at a girls' school. Keed wondered if teacher Miyamoto was afraid of girls instead, and that aside, he asked if telling the other party about not wanting to be touched would make him an excessively self-conscious person, since he wasn't a girl. Miyamoto told him the logic behind a guy should be fine getting touched by others was really weird, and in a way that would also amount to gender discrimination against oneself and others. Keed felt reassured to hear those words and got a little emotional as he agreed Miyamoto was right, and Asahi and Izumi noticed Keed being relieved. Then Keed got all cheerful as he felt better now, and with that settled, he needed to think of a reply. Asahi teased it was going to take 3 hours again, and Izumi thanked Miyamoto for listening to Keed. Now it was about time for lunch break to be over, so Keed saw off the teacher. Then Miyamoto called him out and said it was a good thing to want to do his best, and he would be cheering for him. Keed smiled after being cheered like that, and after he left, Miyamoto recalled how Keed responded to wanting a girlfriend, and remembered the time when his parents told Miyamoto that their son managed to pick himself up with his own efforts and was already a normal boy, but now Miyamoto could see he wasn't normal yet. Meanwhile, Keed went to the meeting point where he and Tsubasa decided to meet up the next day. Keed was nervous because he was confessed to, which means they might be a couple based on his decision. But he wondered if it would be rude to date her while he was still unsure whether he liked her. Either way, he decided to follow what teacher Miyamoto said about not being okay with close contact. Then Tsubasa came with 2 cups saying he was here quite early. Keed replied he came early because the homeroom ended earlier today. There was a nervous pause between the two of them. Then Tsubasa stated she had both cafe au lait and milk tea and asked Keed which one he wanted. Keed thanked her for that, but he wasn't sure which one to pick. He was feeling more nervous because this means he would have to touch her hand to take the cup, and that alone put him in thinking if it would be fine to take the cup with a little touch, while Tsubasa asked casually to pick any one of the cups he wanted. Keita looked over the cups and thought about his hands touching hers while taking the cup, if that would be okay. But then after watching Keed looking at those cups, Tsubasa apologized as she thought that both the cups were of same color, so it was very hard to know which one is what. Then she started looking at the side of the cup to read it, but suddenly, Keed took one cup from her hands, and when their hands touched, both of them blushed. When Keed asked how much was his cafe au lait for, she told him that it's fine, and she was glad that he came to see her even after she called him at such a short notice. So that was a thanks for the coming drink from Tsubasa's side. Keed saw her smile and realized that she is really cute, and when he touched her hand on reflex, it turned out just fine. Then they went to an arcade to play games, and both of them had a lot of fun together. Tsubasa used to come often to arcades with her friends, and she found Keed very skillful when it came to playing in the arcade. Both of them went to a restaurant to have food where both of them sat down and started to chat. Tsubasa wondered if it was okay to ask Keed about her coming off as weird or hard to get along with. Keed looked at her when she asked this question because he did not understand what she meant by that statement. She explained further that she studies at an all-girls school and does not have a single male friend, let alone having a boyfriend. She told Keed the truth that her heart was beating rapidly for the whole day, so she was glad that he was someone really easy to talk with. Keed felt the same about it, as he did not have much experience interacting with girls too much. 2 seconds is all he can last when he looks into a girl's eyes. Tsubasa was shocked to hear it, as they were more alike than they thought. Keed's cheeks turned all red after hearing her thoughts, and he asked her why she thought that he would be a good match for her in the first place. He wondered if he should or shouldn't ask a question like that. Tsubasa's eyes shined as she shared her thoughts with him. She explained to Keed that when they passed each other and their bags got caught up together, that is something which usually doesn't happen, so it must be fate for sure. Hearing the word fate was something he did not expect from her, but then he started thinking about it. Tsubasa closed her eyes and started thinking about the first time they met, which was just yesterday. He passed by her. He looked just like a prince to her, and she found it so cool how he dealt with the problem so stylishly. After hearing words like stylishly and prince, he definitely knew for sure that she is quite a romantic girl. Tsubasa got anxious after what she just told Keed and apologized to him if he felt disgusted by it. Keed smiled at her and told her that it's fine. Tsubasa started telling him how cool, kind, lively she finds him, just like a man of her dreams. But in his head he knew that he is definitely not that kind of a guy. Tsubasa continued telling him that she wants to keep getting to know more and more about him from now on, and Keed wanted to know her as well. Tsubasa smiled at him and shared that she was glad that they could talk about various things from the beginning, because she wasn't used to talking to guys, as she finds it way too embarrassing. So if she tries to show off now, she will be the one suffering later on. Keed went silent because she thought of him more than he was, but before he could speak up, a few girls entered the cafe and waved at Tsubasa. They came near the table, and one of the girls pointed at Keed and asked if he was her boyfriend, and teased her because now she knew that the reason Tsubasa left the classroom in a hurry today was because she had a date. Tsubasa blushed and immediately said that it's nothing like that and they're still just friends. The girls started teasing her, whereas Keed was trying to act normal, as it was very difficult for him to manage or talk when he had so many girls around. One of the girls started introducing herself to Keed as Tsubasa's classmate, but when she looked at Keed, she recognized him immediately. Tsubasa gave her a confused look and asked if by any chance she knew Keed already. And then the girl agreed and told them that she knew Keed as they went to the same middle school. After hearing this, Keed got a flashback of faculty talking about him in the staff room about the rumors of him getting assaulted and calling him a victim. People talking about the victim and gossiping about him applying to an all-boys school after the incident which took place. Keed was standing at the door outside and facing everything which came onto him, whereas people thought that an all-boys school would be a huge relief for him. He got back to reality as the girl was asking him if he remembers her, as they were in the same class. Keed had so many things going on in his mind at once. The girl who recognized him and was claiming to be a classmate from middle school, who she was and in which year she was in, and also, her face did look familiar to him, but at the same time he could not recall her name. All he could remember was the flashback of the incident which made him leave the school, and him accepting that he was assaulted by a woman in the school. After that incident, he did not attend school for a whole year. But then he took a deep breath and he said sorry to everyone, but he will have to leave. He kept money for the bill, and when he started leaving the restaurant, Tsubasa was still confused and shocked about what happened to Kid. She got up to go and asked her friends to help her with the bill, and she will pay them back tomorrow. Her friends assured her and asked her to go after him, whereas the girl who claimed that she was Kid's classmate wondered what happened to him suddenly and what if the rumors she heard about Kid were true after all. On the other hand, Tsubasa ran behind Kid to stop him, and when she tried to stop him by his hand, he shook her off and said in a very loud voice to not touch him. Tsubasa looked at him cluelessly, and Kid knew that he messed it all up by shouting at her this way. He apologized to her, but then he decided to walk away. He kept on running until he saw his friends, and after telling them the whole story about whatever happened with Tsubasa, they were not sure if Kid's emotions are riding on a roller coaster or not. Asahi thought that Tsubasa has special connections for sure, be it good or bad, whereas Kid could somehow remember her face but he couldn't recall her name at all. Izumi was in deep thought as to who would have thought that Kid would meet classmates from the middle school, that too when he was with Tsubasa. Kid thought about the whole situation and whatever happened today and said that it was fun until those girls came, to the point where he was sure that it will be more fun if they really date for real. His friends gave him an assurance that he need not to worry. This time was just an unfortunate incident. Asahi confidently tried explaining to him the ratio of the uncertainty and his feelings towards Tsubasa. He said that it must be balancing out his feelings of him probably liking her, and the uncertainty is almost equal. Izumi was giving him the look, whereas Kid looked more tense after hearing this logic of Asahi's. Izumi said that there's a high possibility that the classmate he met in the cafe might have told Tsubasa about his past, and probably no one knows exactly what happened, but there were light rumors when Kid didn't turn up to school. Asahi cleared that Kid did nothing wrong in the past. Izumi agreed, but then he further explained that he won't know how others took the news via hearsay. There was also a chance that they added some humor or exaggerated the story. Kid's concern was what if Tsubasa received the news in a negative way, because no one really knew what happened. And after hearing Izumi out, Kid was more scared to find out about it. After some time, Kid went back home and saw Tsubasa's text about saying that she was worried about him and she wanted to know if she did anything to upset him. Kid wondered if she thought he was weird, because after all, if he left in a hurry without even contacting her afterwards, while she continues to know nothing at all, it was so not done. He then texted her back saying sorry about all of the things which happened, and then he asked if she heard anything about him from her friend. She texted him back by a confused reply saying that her friend just told him about being classmates, but then Tsubasa asked if something happened between her and Aya back then. Kid started thinking about the girl he met, and now he knows that her name is Aya, but doesn't really ring a bell even after hearing it. He replied to her saying that it was really nothing and apologized for leaving in a hurry back then, and he accepted that he was rude to her friends too since he did not say hello to them. But then right after he sent her this text, he then saw his phone ringing and he freaked out when he saw the person who was calling him was Tsubasa. He then picked it up and heard Tsubasa saying that she was worried about him and couldn't hold herself back anymore, so she called. But then she asked him if he's free to talk at the moment. Kid's eyes shined and he immediately agreed to talk to her and told her that he's in his room right now. Tsubasa mentioned that she knows that they met recently, so she does not expect him to tell her everything right away. But then she said that he is always apologizing to her, and it's okay to take things easy so he doesn't have to be considerate all the time. She asked him if it was not fun for him that they hung out together. Kid replied within a fraction of a second that he had a lot of fun. She blushed and asked if they could hang out again sometimes. Kid blushed and then agreed to it. After hearing his reply, Tsubasa was relieved and asked if they could talk later. She was on her way home, so she had to end the call. She thanked him for picking up the call all of a sudden. Kid blushed and thanked her for everything and ended up calling. He closed his eyes and leaned down on bed as he couldn't think anything straight. On the other hand, Tsubasa thought that some things were definitely off back then, but then she kept two things in her mind about not being too overwhelming and approaching him cheerfully. She questioned herself if what she did was right, but then she had this memory of him shaking her hand away when she tried to stop him, as that was a little bit frightening for her. But then she kept on walking towards hope, giving the benefit of doubt to herself of not knowing too much about guys. Whereas, Kid couldn't stop blushing and thinking about Tsubasa, as he wasn't sure if what he was feeling was love. But he doubted he could find an answer himself, because even if he asks himself this question, this situation of recently realizing it is a bit too complex for him. He couldn't think of how he should feel about her, as he might come weird if he springs it onto her all of a sudden. Then he heard someone say they should let her know again, and Kid noticed that the voice was of two classmates talking to each other about one of them being confessed. but the other guy wasn't really feeling it, so the first guy told him it would be a waste to turn her down. He'd realized he was in the same predicament, then his eyes met that of the other guy. That guy asked him right away if he also thinks the same as him. Then Keed replied he doesn't actually know much about love. That guy called him a late bloomer, and apparently he was a playboy with the name Kobayashi Mitsuki, and the name of the other guy was Sahara Yudai. Then Keed asked them, saying for example, what if one was confessed to, but she didn't mean to start dating right away, but start off as friends instead? And after some time, one starts having feelings for her, then what should he do in this case? Mitsuki stated that was oddly specific, and to think about it simply, the girl was the one who approached first, but now both of them have mutual feelings for each other. He'd figured it could be put in that way. Then Mitsuki said there was only answer to that the guy should thank the girl for waiting and confess that he likes her too and wishes to date her, hearing which flustered Keed and made his face all red. Meanwhile, a friend of Tsubasa named Momoka asked her if she was sure this Seto Keed guy was alright. She couldn't help but remain concerned because this guy knew how she felt about him, but he was still indecisive. Tsubasa reasoned she was the one who told him it was fine to start off as friends, but Momoka mentioned she must be wanting him to hurry up and let her know if it was okay or not. Tsubasa thought she might be right, because if it was a no, it would be hard for Keed to say so. Momoka told her she shouldn't think negatively, then asked her in shock if Tsubasa might be just a convenient woman to him. She denied, saying Keed wasn't that type of person, and she told him that they should hang out again, and he said okay. Momoka found it bad for him to just react passively to what Tsubasa told him. Now that she mentioned it, Momoka said there were many guys like them who won't take advantage of kindness and try to gloss over her relationship. And Tsubasa didn't know much about this, so Momoka stated if he doesn't say anything again when she meet her next time, she should ask him herself about what he thinks about her. Tsubasa got flustered hearing that. Then she got a notification on her phone and figured it must be from Keed. Momoka asked what he said, and the text said it might be a little sudden, but Keed asked if Tsubasa was free after school today. Momoka cheered for her, while Tsubasa thought there was a chance he might reject her. Momoka told her not to be so negative, after which she ended up going to meet up with Keed after school ended. He appreciated her coming even though he called her suddenly, to which Tsubasa replied she was glad he did, and he could ask her out anytime. She suddenly realized she indeed acts like a convenient woman. Then she asked him if he had something to talk about. He'd checked their surroundings to make sure there weren't many passersby. Then he spoke up that he was happy when she came over to his school to meet him, and he also had fun when they hung out. He liked how she called him and wanted to thank her again for all she had done for him. She thought the next thing he would say might be something like, "But I'm sorry," whereas Keed genuinely wanted to reciprocate how Arasaka Tsubasa did her best to try to get things to work. He didn't expect himself to say it in a cool way, but he figured it was his turn now, and if he tried showing off now, he would be the one to suffer later on. So, he came out clear that he didn't want to hide anything from her, so he wanted to tell her something. His hands started trembling a bit, as he mustered up the courage to tell her that during his middle school, he was a victim of assault from a woman. After he told her about his past incident, she was left silenced, while Keed continued that he felt very uncomfortable when he was suddenly touched without warning, which was why he was sorry for hitting her hand away back then. Tsubasa said it was fine, but Keed was extremely afraid to check what kind of face she might be making right now. But since he had decided to tell her properly, he told her that despite that, if she was still fine with him, he would like to go out with her. Tsubasa called his name, and as Keed raised his head with his heart beating fast, he saw her calm face telling him that she was so happy. Keed didn't expect this kind of reaction, and Tsubasa thanked him for telling her about his past. Keed was glad to hear that. Then Tsubasa told him that she had also been touched by bad people on the train ride, so she knows how he must feel. Keed didn't expect her to say that, after which she mentioned feeling surprised to hear it happens to guys as well. But she assured him it was alright, and he didn't have to worry so much about it. And also about her response to his confession, she said yes, she would love to go out with him. However, there was a slight negative doubt between them if this was fine. While they were also happy at the same time, they started calling each other by first names, and Keed also called her Tsubasa with a smile. However, there were apparently people who, due to their experiences of being victims of bad events, become unable to ride trains anymore. It wasn't something to be taken lightly, and certainly not acceptable to disregard the significant harm caused by these misconducts. But for some reason, Tsubasa wondered a little about why it felt so off. However, Keed went to his friends, broke the news to them that she was now dating Arasaka Tsubasa, after hearing which both Asahi and Izumi were glad, and they congratulated him on getting a girlfriend. Keed mentioned he really made those two worry a lot, But with this, he thought he would be able to enjoy a normal youth. Although, he still got to make sure not to get too ahead of himself. Asahi and Izumi found this side of him matured, and when they tried telling him something, the teacher told Kid he was on day duty, so he asked him to clean blackboard for him. Kid went to clean the board, while Asahi asked Izumi what does he think about Kid's progress. Izumi mentioned Kid don't really look too thrilled about it, but either way they hoped it turned out well for Kid. Kid was acting a bit off, but he thought it was because this was his first time getting a girlfriend. He thought this should be normal for a guy from an all-boys school, and he should be at the peak of happiness now. He tried to convince that if a good girl like Tsubasa accepted his past, he should eventually stop feeling anxious. So, Kid believed he just simply have to get used to it slowly and it would be okay. Meanwhile, Momoka was really happy for Tsubasa finally getting a boyfriend, and Tsubasa thanked her for congratulating her. Then Momoka asked if they kissed or hugged each other, but Tsubasa replied she hadn't done any of that at all. Momoka mentioned reading all about it in a manga, and Tsubasa realized that slowly they might do things like that, which brought butterflies in her stomach. Momoka figured that even if they were in different schools, it seemed to be working out, and both of them could even have secret conversations through the night that only they would know until morning. Tsubasa mentioned he did confide in her about something awful that happened to him in the past. That would mean he already thinks of her as someone quite special. Now, the scene shifts to the time when it was Kid's first day of high school, and he decided to turn a new leaf here. It was an all-boys school with no girls, and most of the teachers here were male. It was a little far from his hometown also, so there were only two people here who knew about Kid's circumstances, his friends Asahi and Izumi, who attended the same middle school. But after he took a step forward, Kid froze up, worrying if it would be alright. Then his friends put a hand on his shoulder and asked why he was freezing up over here. Izumi told him to act in a more spring-like way, and Asahi explained it like how Kid usually was. Kid realized he must be looking stupid as he laughed, and then got reassured by his friends not to worry, as they were here with him. Kid couldn't ask for anything else, and he was really happy to have friends like Izumi and Asahi. After which he entered the school with the courage they gave him. Now in the present, Seto Kid has just gotten a girlfriend for the first time in his life, and he told Izumi and Asahi that he would be meeting her the next day. Asahi stated this would be their first date after officially becoming a couple, but when he asked Kid where he would be taking her, Kid only had the movies in mind. He got tensed and suddenly thought over if he should come up with a proper date plan like renting a car and having dinner at a seaside restaurant, and Izumi brought him back to reality. It was still too early to be doing that. Then Kid asked them if they had done their homework, and Izumi completely forgot about it until now, so he asked Asahi to show his notes. Asahi told him to be polite while asking something. Then Kid overheard other boys talking about their fantasies with girls, and he couldn't deal with conversations like that. Then his classmate Sahara called out to him and mentioned having heard about Kid getting a girlfriend. He congratulated Kid, and when Kid asked how did he know that, Sahara replied he happened to overheard Kid talking about it last week. The same time, Mitsuki also came and put his hand on Sahara's shoulder, saying that was good news, and asked Kid if she was cute. Kid thought back about the face of Tsubasa, and he definitely found her super cute. Mitsuki was a little jealous, then he frankly asked Kid if he and his girlfriend had already done the deed. Kid was silenced on that question, whereas Sahara told Mitsuki to not ask something like that to a recently formed couple. Mitsuki said if it was his girlfriend, he would have already done it with her the next day and said that was normal. Sahara said sorry to Kid for Mitsuki and stated this was the kind of stuff Mitsuki thought about all day. Then Kid asked if those things were really that normal, hearing which they got silent, and Sahara repeated what Mitsuki said was not common at all. The next day, Kid went to the place he was going to meet up with Tsubasa, and he was a bit nervous about it. He still remembers what Sahara told him not to pay too much attention to, but he wondered if it was really that normal to actually be doing that with girlfriend. And that aside, Kid wondered if he was really able to get through to her that day. He put his hand on chest because it started feeling like there was so much he didn't know, and he was starting to feel afraid if he could enjoy himself today. He couldn't get why he was always like this. Then he got called out by Tsubasa, and she was wearing a pretty casual dress perfect for the date. She wished him good morning and mentioned it was still 10 minutes before the appointed time. Kid wished her morning back, and he found her really cute in casual wear. She asked if she looked weird since he was looking at her a bit much, and Kid replied it was just that she was so cute that he was a little taken aback. Tsubasa got flustered to hear the compliment, and Kid was read the same, after which they remembered they were about to watch a movie. They wonder what show there would be now. Then Kid realized he was having fun and he had nothing to worry about. And since this was a date after all, He figured it would be rude to her if he didn't enjoy himself. He noticed there was a couple in front of them, and they were holding hands, and Keed also saw it wasn't just one but other couples were doing the same. And now that he was on a date with his girlfriend, Keed thought if he should try holding her hand. Keed mustered up the courage as he remembered that he was still feeling afraid to do so, but when he touched her hand last time nothing happened. And more than anything, he felt like wanting to touch her, so Keed showed the courage to reach out and hold her hand. She felt his hand touching hers, which was a sign of progress for both of them. She was a bit startled while Keed thought he might have overdid it, so he withdrew his hand and said sorry for the suddenness of it. She smiled saying it was okay and they started walking normally like before. However, Tsubasa was really surprised inside after what happened just now, and she recalled when Keed told her that he felt very uncomfortable when he was touched suddenly without warning. She could see he was trying his best, which made her so happy, whereas Keed couldn't understand why he let go of her hand. He held onto her hand for a moment and he knew that he didn't have to be scared, since Tsubasa was a kind and good girl, not an adult woman who would do anything cruel to him. Keed could trust Tsubasa wasn't like that woman, so he didn't have to be afraid, but suddenly he wondered why he started feeling a bit off and negative. After that, they went to the movie hall and there were many movies on the list. Inside their minds, both Keed and Tsubasa liked to watch an action movie, but they wondered if it would spoil the date. Keed asked her which one she would prefer and she asked him the same, after which they decided to count till 3 and pick one. In the end, they both ended up picking an action movie, and they were surprised to pick the same one. They laughed and went to watch the movie, which was interesting enough to keep both of them excited to watch till the end. Later on, they went shopping, then eating together, and when the end of their date was near, Tsubasa stated it was feeling a little lonely to head back now. Keed heard her as she continued saying sometimes she fantasized how lovely it would be if they were in the same school, and then they would be able to see each other every day. Also, if they go to the same school, they wouldn't have had such a fateful meeting. Even so, no matter how they might meet, she thought she would still have a one-sided love for Keed, and eventually muster up her courage to confess to her. Keed was flattered to hear that, then she said sorry for blabbering on. But she was sure if their schools were the same, she would have plenty of rivals and Keed might have found someone else. Keed declined saying he wasn't that popular, and also even if he were to be in an environment with other girls, he was sure he would still fall in love with Tsubasa. He felt a little shy after saying that. Then Tsubasa said that would be nice and she was glad when Keed tried to hold her hand today, especially since Keed mentioned he was bad with close contact, so it means he was trying to get over his fears. Keed knew inside he wasn't exactly trying to, but he realized the fact that it does sound like he was. Then Tsubasa said she wanted to help Keed too, so if he ever felt uncomfortable in any way, he could just let go of her hand. Hearing these words meant a lot to Keed, as she asked him if he wanted to try holding hands again. Keed agreed and he reached out his hand and held her hand firmly. Tsubasa asked how it was, to which Keed replied it was fine, and although his heart was beating really fast now, she was glad and sure that if they keep working hard together, Keed won't be afraid of anything anymore, and this moment became a very special one for both of them. Keed hadn't known that a girl's hands were this small and soft. Keed was feeling good as he felt her hands, then suddenly he felt a spark which brought back a little flashback of his trauma, which made his hands tremble. She asked him what was wrong, and he told her it was nothing. Keed calmed himself down and tried not to think of anything unnecessary. Then they heard the announcement that the train at platform 2 would be arriving shortly. Keed told him her train was here, so she stood up and told him to be careful when he heads back too. She thanked him for a fun day and Keed waved her bye with a smile as well. However, after their departure, Keed was still sitting at the desk feeling weird and light tremors inside. He looked up and sighed as this date was over without anything bad happening. Next day, Tsubasa told her friend Momoka that they managed to hold hands during yesterday's date, and Momoka was glad for her. Tsubasa stated there wasn't much change to Keed's height and his hand felt warm, which made her heart race. Suddenly, they heard another classmate talking about the expected pregnancy of a girl, and that girl was worried thinking about it. She mentioned it must have happened and she stayed over at her boyfriend's place once a week, and like when she does, it was common to have more than just meet up. Her friend recommended that she stay protected, and she hoped her parents wouldn't know. Momoka remarked that those girls seemed to be talking about some crazy stuff there, but Tsubasa seemed to be feeling unsettled after hearing about staying once over a week. Momoka told her these kinds of things were normal for couples, and she was sure Tsubasa's boyfriend would treat her kindly. Tsubasa told her Keed wasn't the filthy kind of guy to treat her like that, and he was really refreshing, pure and wonderful. Momoka stayed quiet as Tsubasa was glad, believing what she thought was better. Later on, when Tsubasa was at her home, she saw a TV program with a couple. Then her mother changed the channel to News 1 and reminded Tsubasa that her tuition teacher would be coming the next day. Tsubasa agreed and said she would come home early. As she went to her bedroom, she sat down and started thinking of the conversation she heard in class, which became a weird memory for her. Tsubasa decided she should divert her mind and get her heart racing, for which she brought out a romance manga and started reading events of a sweet couple. She felt good as she believed that romance should be all sparkly and make her heart flutter, and she hoped she could meet Kid again soon. She wanted them to hold hands again, and also to go to various places and talk a lot more and get to know him better. Tsubasa's beloved Kid was the love she had always idolized, which now became a reality. After a few days, Kid and Tsubasa met up at a cafe where they ordered pastries and coffee. She mentioned that she always wanted to check out this cafe, and was glad they managed to find an empty seat. Tsubasa told him the interior of this place somehow calms her down, and the waitress was so pretty as well. Kid just laughed a little because he wasn't sure if he should agree with her, after which they talked for some time and got out of the cafe after trying some items from the menu which were all delicious. Tsubasa expressed her wish to come again next time. Then she noticed Kid was looking confused as he saw the weather was starting to pour. They didn't have any umbrellas on them either, so Kid stated it wasn't pouring down much yet, so he suggested they should find somewhere with a proper roof. He offered his jacket to Tsubasa and told her it should be a little better this way. Tsubasa asked what about him, to which he replied it was fine. Hearing Tsubasa's heart was moved, and both of them started running in rain and laughing on the way until they reached a park. Kid and Tsubasa took shelter under a roof, and she nervously thanked him for leading her his outerwear. She asked him if he was okay, and he replied that it was nothing. She had a towel in her bag, so she offered to dry Kid's hair with it. He accepted, which made her glad, and Tsubasa was really careful and considerate to let him know before she was going to touch him. She gently dried his hairs with the towel slowly, and Kid was silent like a puppy. He recalled the moment when she told him that he had let her know if he ever felt uncomfortable in any way, and Kid understood she was being very considerate whenever she touched him. He wondered if it was because she remembered what he told her, and either way she was a really good girl with kind hands and a calm atmosphere, which put him at ease. Then Kid and Tsubasa's eyes met from close, and their faces turned red as they slowly got closer and held each other while kissing in this sweet moment of them and them alone. Since childhood, Tsubasa had always admired romance like manga, and she had dreams that she would fall in love just like this. And this situation was precisely what it was now, with the ideal guy she had always wished for. Tsubasa valued this moment a lot, and so did Kid, as after the kiss they looked at each other all flustered, and she mentioned his hairs were now dried. He thanked her for drying hairs and for the towel as well, and Tsubasa was really happy it was Kid she was with right now. They were a beautiful couple together, and later on the next day in the school, Tsubasa's friend asked her if she would be meeting Kid again. Then another classmate of hers approached her and mentioned having heard that she got together with Kid. She asked how it was going on, and Tsubasa replied he was her first boyfriend, so there were still many things she didn't know, and they also got to know a lot about each other. And now she feels like they could talk about anything. But that made her classmates surprised as she asked her if Kid was really her first boyfriend, since it might be a little too much to handle having him as her first man. Tsubasa asked what she meant by that, and she was left confused as she asked Tsubasa if Kid didn't tell her anything at all. Tsubasa was confused, seeing which the girl felt guilty now to even mention it, and hesitantly she told Tsubasa that Kid was absent from school for a period of time. And what she was about to tell her was all hearsay, but it seemed like he got caught up in some kind of trouble with a woman. She asked Tsubasa that she should confirm that part with him, because if he really has a dangerous past, she thinks Tsubasa should find another guy to be with. After that, Tsubasa dropped a text asking Kid to meet up at the same park as before, and thus they met there as said. Kid was confused why she called him here of all places, as he was being weirdly conscious of what happened between them previous time. Then she called him out and said she had something to talk to him about. She apologized for bringing it up if it was something he didn't want to remember, but when he mentioned that he was a victim of assault from a woman, she was under the impression that he experienced getting molested. So, she said a lot of things without thinking them through, and she must have hurt him when she said that. He'd tried to ask why she was asking it now, to which she replied the girl who used to go to the same middle school as him mentioned something about how Kid was absent from school for a period of time, which means he just has suffered through an experience far worse than she imagined. Kid wasn't feeling best from this, but she was really sorry to bring it up like this. Kid told her it wasn't something she should apologize for, and firstly it was his fault for not making himself clear before. Tsubasa asked him to tell her what happened exactly, and Kid mentioned that might not exactly be a pleasant story, but he asked her to listen to everything he had to say about his time in middle school. In middle school, Kid used to be a shy and cheerful boy, and around that time was when he had recently met a teacher, a woman who was behind ruining his middle school. That teacher asked him if he had some time now, and Kid recalled she was the trainee teacher Osaka, and she asked him that since he was in the studies committee, she hoped he could teach her more about his class activities and how a morning test was organized before exams. Kid suggested he would bring all his printouts that he has used until now, and she thanked him for the help. Osaka stated Kid was her senior when it comes to this school and activities around the class, so she would be counting on him. Kid was shy to have to help her, but he was kind enough to give her time to help out with her training, and they began to spend more time together on it. It was when his friends Izumi and Asahi told Kid it was unfair that he kept hanging out with Osaka-sensei. They called him an older woman-loving guy, and Kid called them idiots for being like that. Osaka intervened, saying that Sito was just teaching various things to a trainee like him. Izumi and Asahi said they could also teach her the same things, and she laughed it off. Osaka was a pretty and kind teacher who got along with her students despite being an adult. So, without exception, Kid was also fond of her and admired her very much until that tragic day, when his physical education teacher asked Kid to bring some documents from the storage room. Kid was kind, so he accepted the teacher's request and went there. But then Kid noticed Osaka-sensei crying inside the storage room. And when he called her out, tears were flowing down her face, and she told him that she had messed up and got scolded today as well, which made her feel like she might not be suited to become a teacher after all. She was sorry for also showing such an ugly side of her and felt like she failed as an adult and teacher the same. Kid told her not to say that, because her classes were easy to understand and everyone in class liked her. She then asked him if he too would still continue to like her despite seeing this side of hers, and Kid agreed, saying he would be cheering for her. She looked at him with tears in her eyes and told Kid how much she was insecure about herself every day. Kid looked around thinking what to do now, then he offered her his handkerchief. Osaka suddenly hugged Kid emotionally, and he was startled all of a sudden as he asked her to let him go. She thanked him for being so kind to her, and Osaka could hear the sound of his heartbeat so clearly. Kid was shy to speak already, so he tried his best to tell her he was surprised by how suddenly she held him. Then nobody knows what came over Osaka's mind, as she got on Kid and asked him if he would comfort her. She told him he didn't have to do anything, and she would teach him everything. She also said that he could keep whatever they were about to do a secret. Kid was too naive to know what she was about to do now, and he asked her what exactly she was going to do to him in a place like this. Osaka began changing her clothes, while she told him he would feel good. Kid kept repeating what's as she was doing, then she told him he should feel lucky to get to experience this before others, and be an adult before anyone else. Meanwhile, Asahi and Izumi were looking for where Kid was, then a student mentioned to them seeing Kid going to gym storage earlier. At the same time, Kid was suffering through being assaulted, and each moment of that experience was like a hell for Kid, where he had been frozen and unable to move at all while waiting for this to just pass off. In that time, the person in front of him was no longer the teacher he used to know, but more of a giant monster, and after this incident passed, he was found on the floor after some time by his friends Izumi and Asahi. After this, Kid was traumatized and preferred to be in his room, and his parents were extremely sad after knowing what happened to Kid. The students who didn't know about this began to think Kid was absent from school because he got into some kind of trouble, and Kid's reputation began to be spoiled by the escalating rumors. Kid became afraid and could not do anything at all, and in those days his friends Asahi and Izumi kept visiting him. They acted like usual with Kid and did not even attempt to console or persuade him to go back to school, but came over to meet him as friends. Fortunately, Kid got to hear that the school took appropriate measures and that trainee teacher Osaka got a suitable punishment. After which, during his second half of the third year of middle school, Kid could return back to school again, and he selected this all-boys school after that. After hearing the whole story, Tsubasa's face was all frightened as she didn't know what to say right now. Kid told her he wasn't expecting her to comfort him or anything, so she didn't have to worry. But then he noticed Tsubaka started crying because she thought Kid must have suffered so much. Kid got silent after hearing that, and he began to cry as well with her and also thanked her for hearing him out. After he thanked her, she apologized, saying she shouldn't be the one crying, and both of them began to laugh things off. Then Keed mentioned if she had enough time, since he remembered she was about to have a new tuition teacher coming over, so she needed to head home early. Tsubasa mentioned her thoughts were all about him today, which made him flustered, and later on they saw each other off, hoping to contact each other again. Keed was feeling very much relieved today, and later on he went and told about him sharing everything about his past with Tsubasa to his friends and Miyamoto-sensei. Izumi stated he really showed some courage, and Asahi asked what she said. He mentioned the part when she said he must have suffered so much. After hearing that, Asahi and Izumi's perspectives for Tsubasa changed a whole lot. Keed stated that either way she heard what he had to say, so he thought he should come and update Miyamoto-sensei about this. Miyamoto was glad it was working out for Keed, and he reassured Keed that he didn't have to apologize for anything if he didn't come sooner, since he was here for whenever students face any kind of trouble, or when they need someone's help. He, as a teacher, hoped to be an adult that students could easily approach and talk to, and Keed and others were moved by Miyamoto's words. Keed stated he was so relieved now that he didn't have anything to hide from Tsubasa, and Asahi assured Keed he did his best, and those three began talking to each other. Meanwhile, Tsubasa figured after knowing what exactly happened had a little difference compared to what rumors she heard, and in the end Keed was more of a victim than someone who tried to stir up trouble. He confided in him about his painful past, and the first feeling she had was simply happiness because Keed trusted her, and it felt like they had a bond. It made her happy, but it also made her realize what she thought before about them being alike wasn't true, and they weren't the same at all. Suddenly, she realized she was upset and couldn't understand why she was having negative thoughts right now. Because Keed was the one who got assaulted, and it wasn't about him having that kind of experience with women. Then she saw a couple sitting together with a guy's hand on the girl's shoulder, and seeing that brought a bunch of negative emotions all of a sudden. She could feel her heart getting heavy, and later in her bedroom Tsubasa began to wonder what kind of person that teacher was, and she recalled Keed saying she was pretty and everyone admired her. Tsubasa didn't want to think about it, but she couldn't help herself and felt bad for Keed too. She closed her eyes and wondered if he liked her at first too, or did they also kiss? Tsubasa's thinking was going more negative by each second, and she ended up thinking if Keed was unable to shout or escape from that teacher when she was making physical contact with him. At the same time, Tsubasa knew she couldn't think like this because Keed was a victim and it wasn't his fault. But on the other hand, she also thought that his body has experience with such filthy acts. Tsubasa felt strongly disgusted by that, and Miyamoto had a doubt after Keed told him if a teenager like Tsubasa could really accept someone's heavy past so easily. Whereas, Tsubasa felt unsettling as she ran to the washroom, and Miyamoto's worries were right on point, since Tsubasa felt so disgusted that she vomited a lot. Miyamoto knew there would be times when a person doesn't fully know themselves either, and the same thing was happening to Tsubasa as she didn't expect to feel so disgusted like this after all that happened. During elementary school, Tsubasa learned about adult education, but that was simply a lesson similar to the rest. Tsubasa later on asked her mother about what were the restricted areas for above 18 years, to which her mother replied she couldn't go there but other adults seemed to go just fine. And whenever there was a romantic show on television, the time when actors mention having experiences, Tsubasa's mother would close the television saying variety shows were so vulgar and silly now. Tsubasa realized her mother always gets upset when things like that show up in front of Tsubasa, and the events she had witnessed but was not allowed to understand about somehow made her wonder why everyone else seemed to be enjoying themselves. Next morning, she sat back not being able to sleep at all, and went downstairs wishing morning to her parents. They wished her morning and asked if she wasn't feeling well, to which Tsubasa replied she was just thinking about something. Then Tsubasa had the thought that even her mother had done it with her dad, and the negative feeling again hit her and she left for school saying she didn't need breakfast. Later in the school, Tsubasa thought between classes about that girl who had done it, and even an adult like her teacher should have as well. Not just that, but even her friends Aya and Momoka had boyfriends, so they must have done it as well. And to think it was normal means she might be the only one too ignorant about this. She felt so embarrassed thinking about it, and after school she was walking back the usual route. For Tsubasa, Keed's past was too shocking to her and she was sure it was just throwing her off, so she needed to pull herself together because he told her about his past, despite it being very hard for him. She doesn't want him to think of her as a difficult girl who makes him feel uncomfortable. Then she got called out by Keed and he waved hi to her saying this was a good coincidence. He asked her if she was heading home now and Tsubasa's heart throbbed, which made her think nothing has really changed for her, and Keed was cool as usual, so she might simply be overthinking things a little. Then a guy was walking right behind, so Keed got Tsubasa inside to be careful, but his touch suddenly made her feel so uncomfortable that she reflexively shook it off and felt anxious. Keed asked what was wrong, but she couldn't come up with a reply and started running away saying sorry to him. This was really unexpected for Keed, while Tsubasa kept running and crying in the way to think that her body instinctively rejected Keed's touch. She ran away and went to the road crossing the bridge. Then she heard Keed calling out her name and following her out of worry. He said sorry to follow her, but he was worried about her. She told him it was nothing, but Keed mentioned she looked really pale, and he could walk with her if she wasn't feeling well. But while Keed was speaking, Tsubasa's attention was taking notice of Keed's body, and she started crying. Keed got worried and asked if he did something to upset her, to which she replied feeling like there was something wrong with her after she heard about his past. Keed didn't expect his past would be the reason, as Tsubasa kept thinking about stuff that she didn't want to think about and got scared. Her thoughts started getting all jumbled up, and it felt really unpleasant. She hated it and it hurt a lot, but when she looked up, Tsubasa noticed Keed's face was extremely pale, as if he was terrified of this. Tsubasa knew she shouldn't have said it, and she told Keed it was her problem and it wasn't about him. Keed stated it was normal to feel disgusted after hearing about such a thing, and he said sorry to her. He mentioned asking her to forget about it would be quite difficult too, and he hoped she could have told him this immediately if that was what she really thought. He wouldn't have minded things like she couldn't deal with this or that it was disgusting and that wasn't normal. Tsubasa was trying to tell him that wasn't what she was thinking at all, but Keed went silent as he wondered if her kind words were not from her heart either. Keed was heavily upset and he apologized again for making her force herself because of him, and she must feel repulsed now. She declined, saying she wasn't repulsed by him, and she was so happy at first when he confided in her. But she just had no experience dealing with this because she thought her ideal guy had finally appeared, and the romance that she had always admired was coming true. She felt too uncertain when he didn't know what he was thinking. Even that time when he smacked her hand away on their first after-school date. And she was honestly afraid at that time, and tried her best to understand that romance in real life comes in different forms. However, she couldn't have expected him to have such a past like that. While Keed couldn't help but keep hearing her say that now whenever she think of him after that day, it hurts just imagining it. Like what was exactly done to him, and was it really against his will because he was a guy after all and found have at least tried going against her. At this point, Keed shouted at her to stop it because he was done, and being blamed like this made him shiver. He told her she could only say that because she had never experienced it, so he requested her not to make him say anything about that traumatic event. Tsubasa bursted into tears and Keed told her she wasn't weird. It wasn't her fault and he was sure what she was feeling now was normal. Keed couldn't stand, so he got down while saying it was wrong of him to even think that he could date someone, and he was sorry for dragging her into all this mess. Tsubasa felt broken as she heard Keed's stories, making her feel unpleasant and disgusted. She cried a lot and started walking away, while Keed was crying out loud for not being normal, and he stayed there sitting and crying continuously over it. As the time passed with Keed crying there, he knew he needed to get up quickly or else people would think he was weird. But even so, Keed couldn't breathe well. He wanted to scream and his mind was all white as he sobbed heavily. He wished someone would come and save him, someone from Asahi, Izumi, Miyamoto-sensei or his mom. Then he heard Asahi's voice calling him out and asking what was wrong and what happened here. Keed was crying as he looked up to them, after which they helped him stand up and took Keed back to his home. There Keed told them everything about what happened, and they didn't expect that to happen. Keed was feeling sorry because both Izumi and Asahi even gave him their wishes, but it still didn't work out at all. Izumi told him not to worry about them and there was nothing to apologize for. Keed mentioned he said a lot of harsh words to Tsubasa, and he even made her cry because of him. He felt like he was the worst for doing that to her, and Izumi told him not to blame himself that much, and it wasn't exactly his fault either. Then Asahi spoke up. Tsubasa was the one who hurt Keed first and he had a strong opinion about it. Then they saw Keed heading off somewhere and when asked, he replied going to the convenience store. Keed headed out because it was hard to stay at home now, and he didn't want his mom to worry about him. He felt bad for causing trouble for Izumi and Asahi too, and it was the same thing all over again. He figured it didn't work out, even when he tried, and nothing has changed. He wondered if he would keep living like this. Then Keed realized he was beginning to think negatively now. He just convinced himself that it simply didn't work out this time, and it hadn't been that long since they dated, so the wounds weren't as deep. although he was all gloomy while walking around until Keed noticed he was in front of the cafe where he came together with Tsubasa. He remembered good memories he had in this cafe, about the day when both of them ran in the rain together and enjoyed themselves together. He reminisced about the time when they met for the first time as well, and how bright Tsubasa's smile was in that moment. He didn't notice when he began to cry, because he knew he loved her, but just that wasn't enough. Then a pretty woman came near him and asked what brought him to the front of her cafe. She asked if he was hurt somewhere, or did he not feel well, or perhaps he was a lost child. After her questions, Keed said sorry for disrupting her business, and it was just so much happening. That woman looked at Keed properly and asked if he had some time now, because she didn't think it would be good to walk around while he was in that state. So, she invited him inside the shop for a cup of cafe latte or something. After that, she took him in and closed the shop and asked him to sit anywhere he liked since they were already closed for the day, so there were no more customers. She asked him if he would prefer cocoa or hot milk better, to which Keed replied cafe latte was fine, and he felt like she was treating him like a kid. As he took a seat, Keed recalled the date he had with Tsubasa that day was so much fun. Then the cafe lady brought the cafe latte. Keed said he would pay for it, and she replied it was fine. Keed thanked her for the drink and took a sip from it. He said it was really good, and she was glad to hear that. She asked him if he was a crybaby or did something painful happen to him. He apologized to her, and when she asked why, Keed replied because he caused so much trouble for her, and also a guy shouldn't cry in front of people. She told him gender doesn't matter in this case, since both girls and boys, adults and children all have days where the tears wouldn't stop. And right now, she was the only one here, so there was no one else who would scold Keed, and he didn't have to worry about anything. Keed felt at ease, and he started crying while feeling this calm and warm atmosphere, which was as if the pain in his chest and tears from his eyes slowly made it trickle away. He knew nothing of her name, age and past, and to top it off she was a grown woman. He felt like she was similar to Miyamoto-sensei, and for some reason, he felt so secure being with her. Later on, when Keed felt better, he thanked her for the drink and felt like he should still pay for the drink. She told him if that was the case, she asked him to come back once he was happier again, which would be the greatest thank you to her. Keed was happy after being treated so gently like that. However, the next day in school, Keed was absent and Mitsuki asked if he was sick or something. Asahi told him it was something like that. Then Mitsuki guessed he might be playing hooky to have a date with that new girlfriend of his. Sahara told him Keed wasn't that kind of person, while Asahi and Izumi knew the truth and stayed silent. Later in the afternoon at girls' school, many girls were excited as they shouted there were two good-looking guys over the gate. They wondered if they were someone's boyfriends, and some of them even wished to talk to them. But while Tsubasa was walking normally as usual, she was scared when she got called out by those two guys, which were actually Asahi and Izumi, as Asahi asked her if they could have some of her time. Izumi and Asahi got to talk with Tsubasa, who was with her friend Momoka. Tsubasa recognized they were Asahi's friends and asked them if they needed something from her, since they came all the way here to an all-girls school. Asahi stated she did the same thing previously too. Then he mentioned she must have heard everything from Keed, after which she was repulsed and broke up with him. He asked if he was correct to assume that Tsubasa told him he didn't have to put it with a repulsed phrase. Izumi got worried, and he made sure to let them know they were not here to complain, and in the first place, it must have been difficult to tell her to accept the truth so easily. But Asahi made it clear he was indeed here to complain, because she was the one who approached him and hurt him afterwards. He said that was rather selfish of her, and asked if she didn't think the same. Izumi mentioned to Asahi he did suspect Keed's decision to tell Tsubasa everything, but Asahi said he would have been against it if he knew this would happen. Izumi told her that was going too far, and Asahi was just deciding things after they happened. But Asahi exclaimed that Keed was never at fault at all because it was these women who kept coming onto him, and now they have done Keed like this. Tsubasa couldn't speak against that, and Izumi didn't want Asahi to be rude like this even if he was right. Momoka was also observing things from the side. Then Asahi claimed he couldn't just stand by and do nothing while Keed got himself hurt. They couldn't change what had already happened, so he was here today to tell Tsubasa not to go near Keed anymore. Tsubasa spoke up, admitting she was too much of a child, and she knew the problems and had no intention to tell Keed what was on her mind at all. However, she ended up saying many unnecessary things, and that was terrible of her. But she didn't come to hate Keed nor turn him down. And it was Keed's words that it was wrong of him to even think that he could date someone, and he was sorry for dragging her into all this mess. She stated he was the one who pushed her away first, and to Asahi and Izumi's surprise, she was already aware that she couldn't approach Kid anymore after he rejected her so clearly. Momoka was concerned for Tsubasa, so she spoke up if Asahi and Izumi were going this far as Kid's friend. Then as Tsubasa's friend she would also say something. That Tsubasa had been hurt plenty of times too, and she also thought if Kid was that kind of person, it might be better for her to stop seeing him. For people who have undergone a tough experience, it doesn't give them right to hurt others, so if Asahi and Izumi were going to say that Tsubasa was the one who selfishly approached him, she would have to say that Sito was also the one who forced his trauma onto her and hurt her. And Momoka wanted to make it clear that it was wrong in the first place for third parties like them to intervene. So, she requested them to leave, and after hearing that, they left since whatever Momoka said was valid, and Izumi told Asahi he was being really aggressive today, getting mad and venting his anger like that. It felt as if he was bearing a grudge against them, and if Kid finds out about this, he would be asking why he did all that. Then Izumi noticed Asahi was crying because he knew all that already, and Izumi didn't have to say that this wasn't something they should meddle in. But he couldn't help but think it would have been fine if she didn't appear. Izumi stood silent as he looked at Asahi and said it seemed like he had two big babies on his hands. Meanwhile, Kid was home as he took a day off from school, and he was thinking about the lady he met the previous day. She was a grown woman, but he did not feel afraid at all, and wondered if it was because she was someone who had a comfortable demeanor. Or was it because she was similar to Miyamoto-sensei so it puts her at ease? Either way, he couldn't help but recall what she said, that both boys and girls, adults and children all have days where the tears wouldn't stop, and there was no one else who would scold him so he didn't have to worry about anything. He didn't realize when he started crying, because he knew how hard it was for him to make a decision to forget everything and make it as if nothing ever happened. So, he wanted to take his time to face forward again, and once he was back to school, he decided to apologize to Asahi and Izumi for worrying them and let them know it was fine. After that, he would head to the cafe and give his thanks and maybe even start something new. Meanwhile, at the cafe he went to before, the lady was writing a flyer looking for part-time staff, and she hoped she could find someone hardworking through it to help her in the cafe. Whereas, it was yet unknown how Tsubasa and Kid's life would proceed from this point. Next day, Kid was heading to the school, and on the way he saw the cafe he went to before. Kid thought back that the lady asked him to come back again as a customer once he was happy, which would be the greatest thank you for her, and he decided to invite both Asahi and Izumi after school. Meanwhile, Izumi was watching a song on his phone. Then he asked Asahi to make sure to apologize to Kid if he shows up today. Asahi agreed with him. Then he asked Izumi if he was watching his favorite idol again. Izumi said it wasn't like that, and anyway it would all depend on how Kid would be acting today. He thought Kid was all depressed, so he would be pouring salt over his wounds, and the timing was important here. Soon, Kid entered the classroom all cheered up with a smile, and Izumi figured he would be going with the pretend to be happy pattern. Kid told him not to say that, and he admitted he was pushing too a little, but he has properly processed and come to terms with it. Then he saw Asahi being a little worried and asked if something was wrong. Then they went to the stairs, and there Kid learned of Asahi getting into an argument with Tsubasa. Asahi was really sorry for doing things his own way, and Kid was more shocked at what they did, like two guys going all the way over to an all-girls school. Izumi stated Asahi did that because he was worried about Kid, so he asked him not to get mad at him, and he was at fault too for not stopping him. He asked Asahi to reflect on his actions, and Asahi said sorry for that. Although Kid felt like this made it even more awkward for her. But anyways, since it was a love that's already ended, he thought it was all unavoidable. So, he was really happy that these two did all that for him, and he mentioned how rare it was to see Asahi getting so emotional. Izumi was creeped out a little to see Asahi like that. Then Kid remembered asking the two if they were free after school to go to a place he wanted to go. After school, they went to the case, and Asahi remarked it feels nice. The cafe owner Rio welcomed them, and Kid was glad to see her calm and smiling face. Rio handed them the menu and said their dessert of the day was cheesecake. Those three ordered things for them, and they talked while eating and shared some stories they heard about some part-timers and how hard their work seems. Kid said he should maybe try finding one too, and Asahi asked him if he had something he wanted to buy. Kid replied it was more like getting a fresh start, and he has been wanting to try it out for some time too. Asahi asked Kid out of worry if he would be okay, and Izumi asserted why not, which made Asahi realize he was being overprotective again. Izumi stated there was no harm trying part-time, and if anything does happen they would think of a solution. Asahi remarked they got a broad-minded dad referring to Izumi, and added it was important to consider the working environment, and the people he works with. So, he advised Keed if he gets along well with his colleagues, he would be working there for a longer time. After that, they continued their coffee and pastries, and Keed saw the flyer for a part-time job in the cafe. At this moment, Keed stood up because he simply wanted to try out something new, and he wanted to get over the heavy feelings in him. So, he went to Rio and mentioned he was here after seeing the flyer for part-time, and at that time he was unaware that meeting this person would bring about another huge change in his life. Soon, he started working there by doing things like taking orders and serving the customers, and Rio let him know when he had worked here for one complete week. She asked how it was going so far, and that he was used to working now. Keed agreed and mentioned she was so thorough with her teachings, while calling her by her last name. Then he asked if he should address her as owner or something, to which she replied he doesn't have to be that formal with her, and she has many customers who address her by first name anyway. So, she was fine with Keed calling her with first name also, and he agreed to call her just that then. She was fine with it and to see he was liking working here. Later in the school, Asahi asked how he was doing with his part-time job. Keed stated it was going good so far and the customers were kind too. Asahi asked if he was still a trainee, to which he replied it was around time to see if he was suitable to work there, and Rio mentioned it wouldn't be good for either of them if Keed didn't seem to be cut out for it. Asahi mentioned feeling worried when Keed just decided out of nowhere to try a part-time job, and after that he instantly decided to go home to get his resume done. Keed smiled knowing that was pretty awkward. Then Izumi asked him if he knew how to brew coffee. Keed replied there was no way an amateur like him would be doing that, so he would just be helping out with cleaning and carrying stuff. Then Asahi asked him why he decided to work in that cafe, as he didn't think Keed would work under an older woman. Keed stated he actually knew Rio before that, and he told them about that day and his friends they learned she was kind to him. Keed assured them he still hasn't let his guard down, and doesn't plan on being defenseless either. But somehow, she made him feel like she was an adult who he could trust. Izumi and Asahi wondered what he meant, and they understood it when Keed said he felt like she was similar to Miyamoto-sensei. And also, he knew those two were worried because that happened, but just because of that, he didn't want to live a life where he wasn't involved with anyone else anymore. And to be honest, when it comes to love, Keed had a feeling that he wasn't suitable for it back then either. So, he also doesn't want to feel afraid, overreact in self-defense and continue living in a small world. He figured even if he were to get hurt again, he wanted to do what he could and stay positive, even for a little. But he felt it was a bit wrong to continue making those two worry about him, so he would be extra careful not to be too reckless. Izumi and Asahi were both relieved from Keed's reassurance, and they assured Keed as well that it was fine to cause trouble or make them worry. Keed was happy, while from behind Keed was being observed by Sahara. Later on, Keed went to work as usual and he did really hard work while being happy. After work he thanked Rio for the help, and Keed was happy that he had memorized most of the menu items, meaning he might actually be cut out to work part-time. Then he heard a girl having an argument with a guy saying why did he do things that got her holes up. That guy replied he just treated her like any other friend would, and Keed thought he should hurry up and leave. Then the girl shouted at that guy saying he was the worst, and she should have never liked Sahara in the first place and slapped him. Keed noticed the boy was actually Sahara from his class, and Sahara also noticed Keed and asked if he was heading home now. Keed said sorry to see all that, and Sahara told him not to worry about it. Keed could see Sahara's red cheek from the slap. Then Sahara told him that he honestly doesn't understand why one needs romance and dating. He sometimes wonders if everyone really has that much free time, since there was lots of fun stuff, and things that one would want to do, just like he has some also. He asked Keed what about him, and he recalled a time when he felt like he wasn't suitable for love either. Then Sahara stated he doesn't see these things as something fun, and asked what Keed thought. Keed couldn't come up with a reply, and Sahara said sorry to ask a tough question. Then Sahara rambled on it a little and said that he might be a guy who doesn't catch feelings or attraction for anyone, and he still doesn't know much about it himself either. He also went to Miyamoto seeking some advice and was told that there was such a possibility, and it wasn't that unusual or bad. Then Keed asked him if the reason he got in a quarrel with the girl just now was also because of this, and Sahara replied that his interest in music matches, and she was a good girl but when they dated she suggested doing couple-like things, but Sahara didn't really want to. Sahara couldn't help but wonder why even men and women have to naturally engage in those things, and Keed was listening to his words. Sahara stated even if Keed were to say it was common for a couple, he doesn't understand how normal that would be. After saying all that, Sahara said sorry for rambling on and mentioned he always had this feeling that he and Keed were quite alike, so he kept talking. He didn't mind it and he said he has had experience of knowing that he was in love, so he thinks it might be a little different from his. But the feeling of not having an idea of what normal was, he knew that very well. Sahara thanked Keed, then he frankly said that he wasn't good in topics of girls that other guys talk about wanting or liking. Although, he thought that was because he didn't feel the same, whereas Keed wasn't good with them either because he was shy. Now that aside, Sahara mentioned they were not exactly what one would call normal or common, and honestly all this was so complicated to think about. Next day, Keed went to work part-time as usual and he helped out with setting up a new table and chairs. Rio was happy with his work and she thanked him, since she had ordered new furniture but the manufacturer didn't send someone to help out placing them. He'd told her this was no problem at all, but he asked if it was alright to change all of the furniture. She replied they were rather old, and she took over this place from her grandmother. So, there were many things here that were still in use today, and even if memories may be important, it wasn't a good thing to always be confined by it. So, Rio changed them all together and she didn't fail to remind him that her grandmother was still healthy, as she might have made it sound like she had passed away. Heed was glad to hear that, and he thought a bit on her words that it wasn't good to be confined by memories, and noticed that even the place where he once spent time with Tsubasa had changed furniture just now, while their friendship didn't last. He figured this might be precisely what he needed, to get a fresh start, and Rio's words really hit home. Then Rio mentioned she was worried at first when she first spoke to him here, but now she was glad that Keed was looking livelier than ever now. Keed was flustered when she mentioned the first time speaking to him, because he was basically crying for the most part. He requested Rio to not make him remember that, since it was so embarrassing for him. But Rio went on about how it felt like finding a lost puppy out in the streets on a rainy day, and seeing it frolicking around the next day. Keed asked her if that was how he looked like to her, and she laughed it off, saying he looked better when he was having fun and smiling. Keed was flattered and he thanked her for saying all that. Then it was time for them to attend to customers. Keed welcomed and offered to take them to their seats, while mentioning they could call for him when they were ready to order. The customers this time were a bunch of 3 girls, and they turned out to be Aya and Momoka, as Aya asked her if it was true that Tsubasa's ex-boyfriend's friends came over to their school. Keed was startled to hear that and he was confused how to react in this situation. He could hear them clearly talking about how Keed's friends came over to get back at her, but Momoka denied that didn't happen, and she thought that Keed's friends were very concerned about him. So, it was more like they came by to give her a reminder not to torture him anymore. But back then, Tsubasa was one-sidedly getting blamed, so she couldn't help but speak out of line and now regret it. Aya stated it was normal for one to speak up for their friends, and she was more surprised about going to talk without knowing what they would do to them. Another girl mentioned hearing those 2 guys were quite good looking. Then Aya mentioned Tsubasa had been feeling down lately, and she was worried about her. They also hadn't heard the reason for her breakup either, which made her feel sad for Tsubasa for her first boyfriend's memory being like this. He was certain that these girls were Tsubasa's friends, and those guys coming over must have been Asahi and Izumi. He returned to the kitchen with a strange expression, and Rio turned to ask him what was wrong. She noticed Keed didn't seem to be feeling well, and she also heard Momoka saying to her friends hoping to get over this quickly. And since she had never met this Keed person, she didn't know what kind of person he was. Then Aya said they should start ordering soon, and when they called for the staff, Rio replied that she would come, and she asked Keed to take a break in the back room. Keed was worried and he wanted to work, and she told him it was alright. Rio went to take the orders from those girls, while Keed sat in the back room thinking that he didn't know any of those girls. And it doesn't seem like they knew him either. He wanted to be more positive and it was going so well, but couldn't help but think why such a coincidence had to happen now. Also, he was feeling guilty thinking that Tsubasa was not well because of him. He thought back that she was such a good girl, and now she was unwell because she got involved with him. Then Rio knocked on the door and said she was coming in. She saw Rio sitting with his head low and hands covering his face. She tried to put her hand on his shoulder to ask what happened, but Keed reacted with a strong reaction of being terrified and got away from her. He then said sorry to Rio and she got a bit concerned about him. Card apologized for his strong reaction. Then Rio sat down on the floor to look him in the eyes and say it was alright. Keed paid attention to her words as she told him to take a deep breath and exhale. Keed slowly calmed down following what she said, and she praised him for doing great along with saying he was a good boy. After that, she was glad he calmed down and Keed apologized to her saying he should get back to work. However, Rio told him she already closed the shop and she actually wanted to do it anyway because of the rearrangement. Now, she asked him if something happened between him and those girls who came earlier. Then Keed mentioned he didn't know them directly and told her about the whole story behind this. Rio broke down the situation in simple words, and Keed didn't tell her about the middle school part since it was irrelevant. He said sorry to her for troubling her with his personal affairs, and she told not to sorry because she wouldn't want to meet people connected to her past either, and if it was her, she would even ban them from her store. Keed was amazed she would use her power as manager here. Then Rio asked if he was crying that day also because of this. Keed said yes, and it gave her the idea he must be suffering from his feelings, and told him that time could heal lots of things. Even though some things might be painful and unpleasant now, he would surely be able to overcome them someday. She wasn't trying to be irresponsible and tell him it would be fine, but now even for a little while she wanted him to look at the positive side. Also, having many kinds of romances was part of youth after all, so she wanted him to keep doing his best. Keed felt better after she cheered him up, and he told her that he really felt like she was truly an adult. He asked her if she had experienced many kinds of romance too, or perhaps married. Rio replied she had experienced many kinds of romance, but she wasn't married and she didn't need a partner either. After that, the next day in school, Keed was on cleaning duty while recalling how Rio calmed him down, and it made him really happy. She was a good person, and Keed never knew there could be such a warm, kind and down-to-earth person, not to mention pretty as well as her. Keed was so sure that she already had a husband and a happy family, but for some reason he felt good to know she wasn't married. Suddenly, he realized what he just felt was like some relief and started thinking if he was on the same wavelength as a dog who doesn't want their master to be taken. Then Asahi came and told Keed he would be leaving first because he got part-time. But he saw Keed was acting weird, and when asked, Keed replied he was trying to understand what it feels like to be a dog. Then he mentioned to Asahi that he has something to ask him, that when an adult says that they don't need a partner, what does it mean? Asahi questioned why Keed was the one asking that after saying things like he wasn't suited for romance. Keed agreed he did say that, but he wondered if a person who doesn't seem to have any special circumstances would casually say something like that. Asahi told him if that was the case, they might be prioritizing work or hobbies first rather than romance, since there were many people out there who were not interested in love. After that, Keed went to his part-time job as well, thinking that Sahara said the same thing of not being interested. He recalled it was quite a heavy blow to him when he realized that he couldn't have won normally, and he did feel down when he thought he wasn't cut out for it. And now, when he looks at Rio, he keeps recalling her words that she wasn't married and didn't need a partner. He figured the air around her felt different than usual while saying that, which made him wonder what was the reason and what she was feeling when she said it. The working hours passed by, and after closing the cafe, and Keed went to tell Rio he would be taking his leave. She thanked him for the work today, then her leg slipped from the stool and she was about to fall. Keed moved to help her and she ended up falling upon Keed, but thankfully nobody was hurt. Keed and Rio got closer to each other, and while they were looking in each other's eyes, she suddenly exclaimed sorry for falling on him and asked if he was hurt anywhere. Keed told her he was fine and she thanked him for shielding her from the fall. Rio asked him to let her know if it starts hurting anywhere, whereas Keed was surprised because just now she came into contact with him, but rather than feeling afraid, he felt calm. Then he heard her calling out his name, and Keed apologized to her for touching her. He asked her instead if she was hurt anywhere, and she replied she was fine thanks to him covering her. Keed stated that she was fine and started running away from there out of feeling awkward. Rio was left confused, whereas Keed ended up walking all the way to a park. He was really amazed that he would feel a shiver down his spine when someone touched him, but this time he was totally fine. He wondered why, or because it was an emergency or not intentional or something. Or maybe it was because that person was Rio. He was feeling some new feelings he had never felt before, while Tsubasa seemed to be walking somewhere with a sad look in her eyes and a little change to her hairs, while it remained unsure what would happen in the lives of these two. Next day, Keed had started to understand that there would always be things that one doesn't know in life. He sometimes thinks how easy it would be if there were correct answers somewhere, just like a game's walkthrough. Or he thought he might know things now because he was still a kid. Keed was very confused about why he was thinking about Rio this much since she fell upon him. Rio woke up with the same dream and went to his school like usual. In the class, Sahara was surprised yet again to hear that Mitsuki got another girlfriend, and he was quick to adapt as ever. Sahara asked him if he thought this time it would continue, to which Mitsuki replied that it depends on his current partner. Then Mitsuki asked Keed how he was doing, to which he replied they actually broke up, and this news came out as a surprise to Mitsuki. However, he just casually said there was no helping it and he should move on to the next one. Keed didn't expect any advice from him, and Sahara mentioned to Mitsuki that he doubted anyone could get over it as fast as him. Then Keed asked Mitsuki if he felt guilty when he started to fall in love with someone new. Mitsuki was caught off by such an unexpected question from Keed, and Keed stated he wasn't blaming him or anything but just asking a question. Mitsuki replied he felt no guilt at all, and although it was a different matter altogether if he dumped them in a terrible way. But when a couple dates and breaks up, most of the time the problem lies on both sides. So, if you were to put it in an emotional way, if it doesn't go well, that means they were not fated one or something like that. And it goes without saying that one would get hurt if they fall in love but their heart would remember it. And through repeated regrets, one would learn to be a little kinder to their next partners, so they should keep enjoying instead of moping around because youth won't last forever and would be gone before he know it. And more than anything else, as they say, a new love was the best solution to heal one's broken heart. After school, Keed went to a cafe and he figured Mitsuki and Sahara have quite a huge contrast in personalities and they surely get along because of that. Keed realized one thing, that his youth would be gone before he knew it. Then he shook his head off and felt like he shouldn't think about all this now at work, since he had now become an official part-time worker from a trainee. The cafe became busy soon enough, and at the end after they were closed, Rio remarked today was especially busy, and it sure gets crowded on weekends. Then their door opened and Rio told the person they were already closed, but to her surprise it was her friend Manami. Rio welcomed her and asked how she had been, since she must have been busy after getting married. Manami replied it was really tough but the happiness she gets outweighs it. Rio introduced Manami to Keed as an old friend of hers and she comes over like this to pay a visit. Manami complimented the coffee Rio made best so she couldn't help but come here. Keed then introduced himself as a part-timer and Manami told him to let her know if Rio ever abused her power as a manager. Keed mentioned she had been really kind to him, and Rio told Keed his shift was over so he could take his leave first. Rio thanked her for the day and he got outside the counter while thinking Rio's friend seemed like a nice person. Then after he closed the door, Keed heard Manami telling Rio she was worried that Rio was always working alone. And just when she hired a part-timer, he turned out to be such a cute boy. She asked Rio if she was into having a younger boyfriend finally. Then Rio refused it and said that would be like a crime. Keed could hear them from the outside, and Rio stated she won't mix work and private matters together. And more importantly, Keed was still in high school so she couldn't even consider it, since it was weird for an adult to view a child as a romantic partner. Although, she knew there were a few rare cases of adults being in relationship with minors, which could last only if the love between them held strong. Keed felt somehow relieved and he could feel she was a proper adult, and yet he couldn't understand why his heart aches now after hearing their conversation. Meanwhile, Sahara mentioned to Mitsuki it was rare for him to say all that stuff to Keed earlier, like get a new love or something. Sahara figures he might be a playboy, but he doesn't seem the sort to force his views of romance on others. About that, Mitsuki spoke up that Keed looked like he already had found someone new, and it seemed he was just feeling pretty troubled for feeling guilty about the girl he liked. And Mitsuki could tell Keed didn't seem to be aware of it himself, so he just gave Keed a push. Sahara didn't realize at that time. Meanwhile, Keed couldn't help but rethink Rio's words that it was weird for an adult to see a child as a romantic partner. Those words made his heart ache a little and he was unconsciously pretending not to know it. But both the pain in his chest and the unresting emotions in him were the product of his feelings slowly building up. Keed recalled that ever since he met Rio, she had always been kind and gentle with a warm atmosphere around her. So, he realized that he was drawn to her, and when Mitsuki told him new love was the best solution to heal a broken heart, this feels like he was now aware of his feelings of love, while at the same time having his heart broken. Keed was lost in thoughts in class the next day, and Asahi and Izumi could tell he looked pretty gloomy. Whereas, Keed was thinking about it carefully and he knew somewhat that he won't be good at romantic relationships anyway. So maybe he doesn't need to worry about having mutual feelings, and more importantly he should be happy that he gets to like someone else now. He remembered Mitsuki telling him to be positive and he should enjoy the life of a high schooler capable of love even more. He got up with energy and Asahi figured Keed was cheered up now. Keed thought he didn't need to know what this feeling was, and he simply needed to have feelings for her. He wasn't asking for anything more, so he ended up heading to the cafe and Rio told him he was a little bit earlier than his shift. Keed stated he somehow found himself here early, and he was getting nervous now that he was aware of his feelings. Then Rio asked if he wanted to learn how to brew coffee, if he was interested, and Keed agreed to her offer but asked if she was okay with it since he was just a part-timer. She replied it was fine since he was gradually getting used to work and becoming better. And also, she praised him for being careful with his hands and was sure the coffee he made would have a kind taste as well. Keed never knew she was looking at him that much, and Rio admitted she had seen how hardworking he was. Then out of nowhere, Keed spoke up her name and said those warm words make him so happy, which gives him this strange feeling where it makes him feel like he was about to cry, and like his heart was being saved. Rio was listening to him, and out of nowhere Keed confessed he liked her. Keed instantly thought what he was thinking when he said he didn't need to know these feelings, while he was feeling confused at how he wasn't able to suppress his overflowing feelings in front of her. He figured this must be how Tsubasa must have felt at that time too. And now that he confessed to Rio, he tried to speak something else but was too nervous for it. Whereas Rio spoke up a simple thank you, and hearing him say that made her feel so blessed to be his manager. Keed was surprised because she just shook it off politely and asked him if they should start practicing from next week. She asked him to start preparing for work now, and Keed nervously started working while being extremely embarrassed about why he said that, as those words just came out of his mouth. He got so impulsive when he was in front of Rio, and although it seems like she didn't get the message, Keed wondered if that was really okay. He knows that Rio does not consider him as a romantic partner, but as a kid, and even before that, she doesn't want a romantic relationship either. He knew that in his mind, while Rio was working normally but inside she was feeling startled while hiding her surprised expression. Meanwhile, in the girls' school Momoka was shocked when she saw Tsubasa's hairs, and she stated she got them cut a little and asked if he looked weird. Momoka stated she looked cute but it was a shock that she made such a drastic change even though it was cute. Tsubasa thanked her for the compliment, then she mentioned she wanted to start afresh. She said sorry for worrying about her too, and Momoka got a little emotional. Later on, they were talking with Aya and she asked why it didn't work out with Seto Keed. Tsubasa stated she couldn't tell her the specifics because it deeply concerns his privacy. But in simple words, it was because she couldn't handle his past and figured Aya was right on mark before. She stated when it comes to sexual things, she couldn't help but consider the other party filthy. And the more she thinks about it, the more her head gets confused and she starts feeling sick. So, even though it wasn't Keed's fault, she ended up saying hurtful words to him. Aya was shocked and she mentioned she did tell her to confirm with Keed. But to think she first asked Keed to do the difficult thing of telling her his past, and then she blamed it on him. Tsubasa agreed with a sad expression that was what happened in the end, and Aya and Momoka were left speechless by it. Aya spoke up that she didn't know before what was true, so she didn't tell her back then. But actually at that time, there were some really intense rumors going around that Seto was the victim. And as Aya stepped towards Tsubasa, she asked how could she judge him instead and even say hurtful words to him, which made her the perpetrator as well. She asked Tsubasa if she was always such a terrible person, leaving her feeling empty. Aya called her argument was way too immature, just because he had adult experiences in the past. How could she judge him as filthy and disgusting? Aya told her if she couldn't accept that, how could she even be going to find love with anyone, which was something that everyone will do sooner or later because that was normal. Tsubasa stayed quiet for a moment, until she spoke up asking if she was the weird one for not being able to accept what was considered normal. Even though she knew what she had done to Keed was terrible and unforgivable, she asked her to tell her what else she could have done to deal with this pain. Tsubasa reasoned she couldn't just change her perspective because she was not taught those things, and that was just how she grew up. When she realized that even her parents engaged in these acts in the past, Tsubasa got sick just thinking about it. And now she asked if she was the weird one and everyone else was normal. Momoka felt bad for Tsubasa, while Aya asked if she was talking about her parents or relatives. It goes without saying she wouldn't feel good, but that had nothing to do with Keed in this situation. Tsubasa couldn't raise her head, while Aya explained to her that it wasn't her fault that she was raised this way. But when she thinks that the victim had done those acts, and that makes them filthy, that makes no sense at all. And on top of that, why did she have to tell Keed something that was going to hurt him the worst, which couldn't just be said done accidentally? She told her that by doing this, Tsubasa was practically on the same level as foolish bastards who assault others and blame the victims instead. Tsubasa shouted at her to shut up, because she knew that she had said things she couldn't take back. She has regretted it so many times since that day, thinking about why she said all that to him. And either way, Tsubasa exclaimed Aya won't understand how she feels and this doesn't concern her in the first place, so why was she even mad about it? Aya spoke up that she had experienced something similar in the past, but her pain was nothing compared to Keed's. Tsubasa was surprised as Aya opened up about her incident when she was assaulted and then blamed herself even if it was that guy's fault. She couldn't stand just thinking about it, and now as she held Tsubasa's collar, Aya asked if Tsubasa meant that her past and people who experienced assaults like those were all filthy and disgusting. Tsubasa began crying as she claimed that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't just stop her mind from thinking about it, which was why she was suffering now. Momoka, standing behind watching this drama, began crying herself, and Aya told Tsubasa that she should think carefully about what she has done to Kid, because what she did was not just blaming his past experiences, but rather how cruel it was to dig into the wounds of a victim's past. Momoka and Aya went away while Tsubasa was left sitting and crying while thinking about it. She recalled the memory of that day when she blamed Kid, and he said sorry to her for making her feel unpleasant and disgusted. Kid couldn't hear any more of her blames, and told her that he hoped Tsubasa could have told him immediately if that's what she really thought. He told her she could only say it because she had never experienced it before, so he requested her to not make him speak any further about it. Tsubasa was beginning to realize how worse Kid must have felt, and she cried out loud inside, knowing there was no forgiving her. Meanwhile, Kid was at his part-time job and Rio praised him for how quickly he picked things up. She thought he would take a little more time to get all of it down, but he was really skilled with his hands. Kid told her it was just that she was a great teacher, and now she said that would be all for today. Later on, when Rio was at her home, she was in bed and she seemed to be not wearing anything while feeling lost, thinking about the time when Kid confessed. That made her so flustered, and she never thought he would say that out of nowhere. She somehow managed to avoid it that day, but even after that, whenever her eyes met Kid's, he would look away because of being made conscious of it. She wondered why this always happens. Then a guy came asking her what was wrong, and it seemed like she had done deeds with him just now. She stated it was just her shop's part-timer, and it seemed like he had feelings for her. That guy asked her if that guy was her age, to which she replied he was just a high schooler, although an adorable one. But she treated him like her younger brother or nephew. Then the guy told her to make sure not to toy with a high schooler's pure heart. The guy mentioned thinking she could only handle pragmatic relationships, and she replied she wasn't toying at all. She stated that the part-timer was a really good boy, but she doesn't know if she messed up the sense of distance more than that of a proper owner to part-timer relationship. And either way, she understands that she needs to be careful from now on. Next day, Kid asked her to teach him again how to brew coffee, and she helped him do it step by step more accurately. She thought inside that he wasn't raising any complaints at all, which made him truly a good boy. But she wasn't sure if she should just keep pretending that he never confessed. After that, Kid made a coffee and asked her to give it a try. She took a sip and gave her feedback that it was better than before. Kid thanked her with a flustered look on his face, and Rio was having a really hard time ignoring such a cute expression. She told him that was all for today, and he thanked her for helping him learn more. After that, Kid asked her if she had some time now, and when she asked him what it was, Kid said sorry for saying something weird the other time. She pretended not knowing and asked what he meant by that. Then Kid mentioned he was talking about the part where he said that he likes her. Rio was bummed and she faked a smile, while thinking why did he bring it back up again. She asked if that was really weird, since it makes her happy to know he adores her. Rio wished he would just change topic now, but Kid straightforwardly said that he meant it in a romantic way when he said that he liked her. She was startled now that he went and said it, and that straightforward youth of his was too dazzling for her. But then Kid added that he understood she wasn't looking for a romantic relationship, and also that she saw her as a child. So, he wasn't really expecting a reply from her and just wanted to let her know. Rio knew she couldn't dodge this one, and she noticed he was too young to know how selfish those words, just wanted to let her know, were. She thought why everyone was like this, and why would they confess even though they knew it wouldn't work. If only they hadn't, she would have maintained a good relationship, and this brought back terrible memories for her. For now, she told him that she was sure what he was feeling now were not feelings of love. Kid didn't get her words until she told him that he knew nothing about her. After she said that, Kid knew she was right about not knowing her. Then she asked him why he thought those were feelings of love, and was it because she was his type? Because she was kind to him, or was he into older women? Kid gulped and she waited for him to speak, until he spoke up that he does look like a child from her perspective, and she might think he doesn't know anything at all. And she might have only shown her work side to him, but he reasoned that was still a part of her, and he felt that she was a warm and wonderful person. He was drawn to her personality, not because she was his type or anything. He didn't know how she felt toward him, so he said sorry for being a little mean because he took her feelings lightly. Then Rio spoke up that she wasn't the great person he made her out to be, and she was glad that he adored her. But her point was that he might be misunderstanding what he was feeling. She mentioned him saying she didn't have to respond to his confession, but she thought he was a really good boy, and she wanted him to be happy in a normal way. He'd wished at this point she would stop, because he didn't want to be denied his normality again. So he spoke up first and told her that lots of things happened to him in the past, and that made him afraid of women, especially adult women. He started breaking out into cold sweat, and couldn't stop shaking just by thinking about a woman touching him. But he was fine when Rio touched him, and he felt relief rather than fear, and he started thinking that he must be fine now. Since then, he considered her special, and Rio seemed to have got some idea, so she called out his name. Whereas, Keed said even if it was just a little, he got happy, and his heart started beating rapidly. He felt so much happy, and if that wasn't love, he couldn't think of what these feelings were. And on top of that, if she tells him that he doesn't know anything about her, that makes him want to know more. Rio was listening to his feelings, while Keed said sorry to her for saying such selfish things and burdening her with it. But to him, this love was something normal and precious that he had finally found. So, he requested her not to say it was a misunderstanding. Rio had her own insecurities, because all the guys she had met until now were only friends in name. And in the end they would name their obsession for her as love and want to marry her. When they thought of the time spent with her was just an investment, and if she rejected them, they would blame her for wasting their years. However, Rio knew Keed wasn't like them, but she wanted to teach him something. So, she asked Keed if he was free tomorrow. Keed replied he was free and didn't have school either. Hearing that she mentioned the shop would also be closed and she was thinking of going shopping. She asked him if he wanted to come with her, and Keed replied he didn't mind, but he asked how that was connected to their current conversation. Then to his surprise, Rio suggested going on a date for the whole day tomorrow, and she told Keed to meet in front of the shop at 11 in the morning tomorrow. And just like that, Keed ended up reaching the meeting point on time, and he wondered what was going on here, as he had no idea what was on her mind at all. Soon, Rio came in a pretty and casual dress, and she could see Keed arrive before time. Keed saw the air she gives off feels different than usual, as he wished her morning back. Then they started off their date with going shopping, and she thanked Keed for carrying her bags. Once they were done with shopping, she mentioned they should go somewhere they could be alone. She took Keed to the amusement park, and there they got on a Ferris wheel. Keed was feeling flustered getting to ride Ferris wheel together with a girl for the first time in his life. Then Rio stated the reason why she invited him out today was because if they meet outside of work, they won't have to concern themselves with their work relationship, but more of a man and woman. Keed wanted to know more about what she meant by that. Then she mentioned he said he liked her in a romantic way, and if so, she asked him to kiss her right now. Keed was caught off guard by a sudden request like that, and Rio was calm as usual. He wondered why she said that out of the blue, and why was he questioning this, because if he likes her in a romantic way, he shouldn't hesitate from touching and kissing. But here he tightened his hands, while thinking why was he always not able to do things that were normal. Rio told him that the expression he has right now was not the one should have when a girl he likes asks for a kiss. Keed was feeling all stiff and a little frightened, as she explained the reason he couldn't do it was probably not because he was embarrassed or nervous. Keed asked how she could tell, and she stated it was true that she asked him out because she wanted to talk to him without their relationship as an employer and employee. She then mentioned him telling her about being afraid of adult women, and she was somewhat aware that he was carrying quite a huge burden. So, he must have felt like by falling in love with an adult woman who he could approach normally made him think he was becoming normal. He knew she got that part right. Then she clearly told him that was not love, as friendship, respect, intimate, trust, and love could all be categorized as like. But if he didn't see one for who he really is, he couldn't call that love. Keed asked if his feelings for her were respect and trust, to which she replied saying she would be happy if that were the case. But he hesitated when she asked him for a kiss. So, she thinks he already has an answer for that. Keed received a logical response from a proper adult, and it was as if those words were telling him to wake up as they stabbed right into his chest. And in the end, he felt like nothing had changed, which made him cry. Rio got concerned and thought about what she should do now, as it looked like she hurt his feelings. Then Rio shared his past event with her that in middle school he was assaulted by a trainee teacher. The school dealt with it appropriately, and he has friends who have supported him. While Keed was telling her about it, he thought she would surely be repulsed. He then mentioned that 3 years have already passed since that tragedy, and he was always afraid. In this moment, Keed couldn't stop the words and tears coming out of him, as he told her that he always felt like there was a hand pulling his leg into the dark. Rio didn't expect his past would be like this, and Keed continued after that incident. One of his middle school teachers said to him that he was pretty lucky, and that teacher was envious that Keed had such an experience with a beautiful woman like her. Keed was so caught up by that, and Rio stated both that the teacher and the perpetrator were terrible people. After that, Keed said he was in pain and covered in fear while wondering if he was normal, and was it really something to be envious of. He had realized with time that if he kept getting trapped in this mindset, he wouldn't change, and he didn't want that. After telling her everything, he apologized to her for telling her about such a disgusting story, to which she replied it wasn't disgusting, and now she learned of the burden Keed was carrying. She now understands what Keed meant when he said that love was something normal and precious which he found in her. He figured it was fine if it was a misunderstanding, and also fine if it was just temporary. Keed wanted to live a fun life without having to be fearful about anything, and fall in love like most people. He wanted to have nothing that he needed to hide from the person he liked. That was kind of normal, what he always wanted so badly, but always ended up in tears. Rio asked him what was normal, since everyone including her uses this word naturally, but she wondered for whom is that considered normal. Previously, she told him that she has no intention of marrying or falling in love, but when it comes to matters like that, they become a bother when one becomes an adult. She offered her handkerchief and said what happened to him in the past must be causing some kind of trauma. But there were many people out there who consider an adult woman without any unusual circumstances and still not wanting to marry is not normal, even though there wasn't anything that everyone was expecting. So, in the end only he could measure what was normal or not for him. Keed wiped his tears, as Rio told him it was his choice to move forward while holding on to his past or blow it all away. And no matter how he lived his life, it wasn't important to know whether that was normal or not. Keed slowly quieted down and asked Rio if she wasn't afraid to be different from everyone else, to which she replied that might be because she was an adult. She explained to him that adults have lived a longer life than him, and he was still halfway through. So, it was fine even if he was uncertain or afraid. It was also fine if he made lots of mistakes. So she asked him not to be confined to normal because she was sure there was more to it than that. Also, she told him he wasn't at fault for what he went through, and the fault lies with the perpetrator, nothing more, nothing less. And no matter what anyone tells him in the future, he should never forget that. Keed cried it all out and soon their ride was over, and Rio thanked him for accompanying her today. Keed said he should be the one saying that, and he was really sorry to cause her so much trouble. He bowed and thanked her for everything she told him, hearing which she felt relieved and told Keed if it wasn't him, she wouldn't have made the time for this in the first place. She would have ended with, she couldn't answer their feelings, and the reason why she wanted to have a proper talk with him was because they have a relationship of trust between them. She feels that these are harder to build up than romantic feelings, at least to her. However, after seeing how straightforward Keed was yesterday, she found herself once again thinking how wonderful it was to care for someone. She was happy to have this rare experience for the second time in her life, and Keed asked her how about the first one. She smiled and said it was when her older sister brought her fiancé along and she seemed so happy. Keed was mesmerized by her smile, then she asked him to meet again at the cafe as manager and staff. After that, they saw each other off, and on his way Keed figured Rio was really an amazing person, and he received so many valuable words that he felt unworthy to hear them. It seemed like his feelings toward her weren't love, and he made many mistakes and messed up. But at least it wasn't worthless because these feelings he felt weren't meaningless. Keed wiped his tears and he recalled Rio's words again. For a moment, his ears hurt a little when he thought something had happened to Rio as well. He considered that must also be an unconscious bias, and decided to just ignore it and move ahead. He wonders if he also hurt someone with words and feelings without intending to. Meanwhile, Rio welcomed a person into the cafe even during closed hours, and she saw it was her brother-in-law. She asked him if he was well, and he just replied good and all. Rio asked him if he hadn't read the signboard that said they were closed. The guy replied the lights were on, so he came here just to see her. She asked if he would like to have a drink, and he thanked and replied being glad to see she was doing well too. Then Rio mentioned she just happened to think about her sister today, but her husband replied he didn't really miss her because she had never left his mind, as it turned out that Rio's older sister had actually passed away. Next day, Tsubasa went with a juice to say sorry to Aya about what happened before. She had thought a lot about it since then, and realized once again how terrible her words and actions were. And also there must have been so much that was hard to say, but Aya was honest and said it straight to her face, and she was thankful for that. Aya accepted her apology and stated she really likes that honest side of hers. She also apologized because she was somewhat of a third party, but she was the one who told her to look into Keed's past, and yet started blaming her after that. Tsubasa told her she understood what Aya said was all for her sake, and they together hugged each other to make up again after the previous fight.